Hello, and welcome to a bonus episode of Stories from the Wire, the App Meta podcast, where we talk to the experts about the most pressing app and network issues facing the enterprise today and tell you how to work smarter, not harder, to speed up resolution. In this episode, we're featuring a chat with Technical Account Manager Joseph Ochs that looks at the two big V's that enterprise IT teams have had to reckon with during the pandemic. Those are VDIs, or Virtual Desktop Interfaces, and VPNs, Virtual Private Networks. Along with unpacking the what, how, and why of those two big networking technologies, Joe shares his views on the best infrastructure strategies for securing Microsoft Teams, general voice and video management tips, and his views on the future of work. Enjoy the show. All right. So earlier you had actually mentioned VDIs. Now, I don't know a ton about this. Could you maybe unpack how customers are leveraging VDIs in a work from anywhere scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've been seeing is that a lot of companies, in order to secure their network connections and maintain the same level of ingress and egress control, have been leaning on VDI platforms. So essentially what happens is the user logs into a computer. They then go to some application which hosts their VDI. That VDI exists on a server somewhere. The VDI manager exists on a server somewhere within the company infrastructure. And from there, they're able to launch a secure connection, a remote tunnel, effectively, to whichever applications and services or whichever desktop services that they want to use. So a lot of customers, for example, are using this, like I said earlier, for security purposes. It means that I no longer have to be shipping out a device with certain applications on it. The user can access it from basically anywhere as long as they can connect back to that corporate VDI host. It also means that users are going to be able to use, in some cases, personal devices. So it eliminates cost of logistics and maintenance on company-provided devices, and there's just a standard that they have to meet. When it comes to VDIs, though, VDIs and VPNs, I think, are the two big Vs that we deal with in today's day and age. From a security perspective, they add extra layers that prevent employees from being able to access certain resources that they shouldn't be able to access, or secure connections to different applications and services. The challenge that we're seeing, though, is that anytime you introduce a service like a VDI or a VPN, you're basically introducing some level of latency on top of that. And there's unfortunately no way to avoid that. And this goes so far as to have companies like Microsoft, when you deploy Microsoft Teams, tell you we don't recommend using Teams over a VDI or other sort of access broker technology, for example, CASB services.
Yeah, and it makes sense. You put in an extra set of hops just to get to the manager or the centralized location, and then you end up going out onto the public internet to get to something like Teams, right? You're just adding additional network delivery paths to every request and every response. So that makes a lot of sense. I feel like we've seen that a lot with VPNs and the early idea of like split tunneling out and making sure that you can go to trusted apps. Do you know if any customers are pulling out Teams and some of those trusted apps outside of the VDI, or is it kind of just everything's got to go through that?
I mean, most of my experience has been exactly that customers are pulling out any application that can be sourced direct to internet as such, because I think a couple of things have happened during the pandemic, and one of the major themes has been the realization that there's no longer a need to backhaul everything. I was dealing with a financial services customer who I've been working with for a few years now, and when we first started talking, I remember one of the big requirements that they had from the monitoring was be able to do point-to-point monitoring, site to site, because all of their services either backhauled to the data center or was a direct site-to-site connection. Things like Skype, for example, on premise, if I wanted to call somebody else in the organization, it was a point-to-point link. It didn't traverse the internet, it just traversed the LAN.
Well, it's the peer-to-peer versus relay, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And so as time has gone on, that company has kind of changed their approach. And the first thing that they did was they said, okay, well, we're moving towards a Teams model where it's the relay approach versus the peer-to-peer. That obviously changes how we have to monitor, and that changes the approach that we take. And then we've kind of further evolved as the whole pandemic struck to say, well, listen, I have a whole bunch of users that are now operating out of home networks. Do I really need to have everything backhauling? And we might have a user in Toronto that's backhauling to Boston to go back to an application that lives in Toronto, just for the sake of saying, hey, we're using our MPLS. So there's been a lot of those conversations that have happened as part of these pandemic discussions. And so we're seeing more and more this variance away from the traditional model of backhaul everything to a data center or secure everything behind a VDI or a VPN, to say there are applications that have that security built in where I don't really need to worry about it. And it's not hurting the business any for me to break that out and instead leverage a consumer network versus the corporate network.
Joe, I'm going to ask you the $1 million question that I've asked everybody on here. What are your predictions for work from home? Do you think we're going to be back to the office anytime soon? Do you think it's a hybrid work scenario? Don't have to put your scientist hat on. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has changed work as we know it as a whole. I don't really ever foresee the world getting back to the pre-pandemic approach to commuting and working from office and working from home. I think it's very clear based on all of the articles that we're seeing every single day about changes to policy from all of the big tech companies, whether it's negative in that, yeah, we'll let you work from home, but there's going to be a pay cut or some reduction in benefits as a result of that, to other companies that are more loose and saying, this has been great for us. We've seen an increase in productivity. We've seen the opportunity to diversify our employee base by hiring now outside of our traditional geo regions like at Meta. And so I think what we've seen is there's a drastic shift in the office culture, as it were, that the idea that, in order for me to do my job, I have to be in the office. So I think we're going to see a lot more companies moving to the hybrid approach. I think we've already seen a large number of companies that have moved to the fully remote approach as well. And I see a lot of organizations that are giving the employee the option to choose and say, what works best for you? I know personally for me, I've been working in a Boston company for almost 10 years now. And one of the things that I've realized is that it's nice to be able to be around people and be face to face. But at the same time, there's also a level of impact that has on day-to-day life. And so if you're like me and you live well outside the city and you commute every day, getting back to that, 9 to 5 commute every day is going to be really difficult, and in some cases impossible. I mean, I have team members now that are spread across the globe. They're never going to set foot in our office in Boston, for example, because it doesn't make sense. We still do have employees that live 20 minutes from our Vancouver office, and they will probably poking their head in. So it's really variable, but I think it's going to be a hybrid approach as things return to quote unquote normal.
Absolutely. And I know that the traffic from New Hampshire to Boston is already back to pre-pandemic normal. So I hear you loud and clear on that 9 to 5 commute. Thank you very much, Alec and Joe. And thank you, listeners, for joining us on Stories from the Wire, the App Meta podcast. Subscribe to our feed to get the latest tips and tricks every week on how to manage network performance for the future of work.